I'm a father of 3 in the old mill town of Dewsbury, and I still remember the morning when the head teacher, Mrs. Qureshi, summoned every white child to the assembly hall. My eldest daughter, Emily, was 11 then. She came home shaken, tears streaking her cheeks, and told me that the teachers had lined the white pupils against the wall and ordered them to kneel. The reason given was that the practice would teach respect for Islamic prayer. The Muslim children were told to stand and watch. No one asked for our consent. No one sent a letter home. The school simply decided that English heritage counted for less than the new ideology. I marched to the gates the next morning. A security guard blocked the entrance. He wore a yellow vest emblazoned with the words Community Cohesion Officer. I told him I wished to speak to the head teacher. He replied that the school now operated under guidance protocol issued by the local council and that any parent raising concerns would be referred to Prevent. The word hung in the air like a threat. I had served 6 years in the Yorkshire Regiment, yet here I stood, labelled a potential extremist, because I dared to question why my daughter was forced to kneel. Inside the office, Mrs. Qureshi greeted me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She wore a black hijab tightly pinned. On the wall behind her hung a framed poster of the Kaaba. She said the exercise had been misunderstood. It was about fostering mutual respect. I asked why only the white children had to kneel. She answered that white pupils carried historic privilege and therefore needed to experience humility. I reminded her that Emily had never oppressed anyone. She replied that collective guilt applied, whether Emily liked it or not. That afternoon, I met other parents at the Hare and Hounds pub. The fathers looked beaten, the mothers furious yet afraid. One man, a plumber named Colin, said his son had been sent home for refusing to remove a small cross on a chain. Another parent, Sarah, said her daughter had been told that British history was nothing more than colonial violence. The head of history had replaced lessons on Hastings and Agincourt with modules on the evils of Churchill and the glories of the Caliphate. We agreed to form a group, but we gave it no name, because names attract attention. I began to record my daughter. Each evening she recounted fresh humiliations. One teacher had marked down her essay on Magna Carta because it praised English common law. Another lesson involved colouring in prayer mats while singing nasheeds. The turning point arrived when Emily described Friday assemblies. Every week, the entire school gathered in the main hall. A local imam stood on the stage and delivered a sermon in English and Arabic. The white children were instructed to sit at the back on the floor. The Muslim pupils occupied the benches at the front. Emily asked why. She was told that seating reflected the new hierarchy of sensitivity. I wrote to the local MP, a Labour woman who had once posed for photographs at a mosque. She replied with a single paragraph stating that diversity enriches us all. I wrote to the Regional Education Authority. An official telephoned to say that parents who objected to inclusive practices should consider private schooling. I did not have £40,000 a year to spare. I tried the press. A reporter from a national newspaper listened for 20 minutes, then said the story was too toxic for his editor. He suggested I contact a small online outlet that specialized in stories the mainstream would not touch. 2 weeks later, a journalist visited my home. She recorded Emily quietly describing the kneeling exercise. The footage lasted 3 minutes. Within hours, it had been viewed 200,000 times. The backlash came fast. First came the accusation that I had coached my daughter. Then came the claim that the video had been doctored. Finally, the school issued a statement that the activity had been a voluntary mindfulness session misinterpreted by a disruptive minority. Emily was summoned to Mrs. Qureshi's office and asked whether she loved all her classmates equally. She answered yes, but the woman pressed on, asking whether she wanted to cause trouble for her friends. That night my daughter sobbed herself to sleep. The council launched an investigation. A panel of 3 officials visited the school for half a day. They interviewed no white parents. They observed no lessons. Their report concluded that no evidence supported the allegations of discrimination. Instead, the report criticized parents for inflaming community tensions. Social services sent a letter warning that any further online posts could trigger safeguarding concerns. I felt the walls closing in. One Saturday morning, I drove Emily to the outskirts of town. We walked the moors above the Worth Valley. I told her about her great-grandfather who had fought at Tobruk. I spoke of the village church where generations of our family had been baptized. I asked her to remember that she belonged to something older and stronger than the ideology inside the school walls. She looked across the heather and asked whether we would have to leave England. I had no answer. Autumn brought darker changes. The school introduced a new uniform policy. All girls, regardless of faith, had to wear loose trousers and long sleeves. The stated purpose was modesty. The local Sikh family objected because the trousers clashed with their religious dress. Their complaint was rejected. I attended a governor's meeting. I stood and read from the 1998 Human Rights Act. The chair, a local businessman who had converted in prison, thanked me and moved to the next agenda item. After the meeting, a young teaching assistant approached me in the car park. She whispered that the staff had been instructed to refer to the pre-Islamic period in Britain as the time of ignorance. Winter arrived with snow and silence. The school held a nativity play, but Mary wore a hijab and Joseph carried a copy of the Quran. The three wise men were replaced by three community leaders who presented gifts of tolerance, diversity, and inclusion. I sat in the audience and felt the last traces of my childhood evaporate. Emily played a tree. She stood at the back wearing brown tights and a green T-shirt. Her eyes searched the crowd until she found me. I gave her a small nod. She tried to smile. The final blow came in January. A letter arrived stating that from the next term the school would adopt a halal-only menu. No packed lunches would be allowed, except for medical reasons certified by a doctor. I phoned the council and asked whether vegetarian options would be available. The officer replied that halal slaughter was humane and that cultural sensitivity outweighed parental preference. I asked what happened to choice. He laughed and hung up. That evening I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the map of the United Kingdom. My wife placed a hand on my shoulder and said we could not fight alone forever. We looked at house prices in Lincolnshire. We spoke of small Anglican schools in market towns where the church bell still rang on Sunday. I felt the ache of exile even before we packed a single box. On the last day of term, I collected Emily at the gate. Mrs. Qureshi stood outside shaking hands with the parents. When she saw me, she offered a triumphant smile. I asked whether she felt proud of what she had built. She replied that the community had moved forward and that the past was gone. I told her that the past had a habit of returning. She turned away. We drove out of Dewsbury at dawn. The mist clung to the hills like memory. Emily asked whether the new school would let us sing the national anthem. I said we would find a place where the anthem still meant something. I glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw the towers of the mosque recede into the grey. I did not feel victory. I felt the hollow thud of retreat. Yet in my pocket, I carried a small wooden cross my daughter had carved in secret during art class. She had wrapped it in tissue and pressed it into my hand. That cross was proof that resistance lives even when the world insists on kneeling.